Welcome to the Legati Christi podcast. I'm your host, David W. Gilmore. Way back in episode 1, I told you that the mission of Legati Christi is to equip ambassadors for Christ. In that introduction, I said that we're going to be using apologetics as part of this process. And apologetics isn't a term that many people know these days, so I wanted to take a few minutes here and just kind of lay out what that is. Now you'll notice that apologetics sounds like apology. And when I say that word, you probably picture a time when you said you were sorry for something that you did wrong. The I'm sorry is usually followed up with reasons on why you did what you did. Like, I'm sorry I ate the mint Oreo ice cream, but you know that's my favorite, and nobody else was eating it. Or, I'm sorry I haven't fixed a dripping faucet yet. I got caught up on my favorite book, and I lost track of time. So, the word apology comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a defense, to make your case. But apologetics isn't where we say we're sorry for being a Christian. It's where we give reasons for why we believe what we believe. And we get this mandate to do apologetics from 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter writes, "But in your hearts regard Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that lies in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." The part where it says make a defense is the Greek word apologia. In ancient Rome or Greece, an apology was something like a legal brief, where you would get up in front of the court or you'd write to a magistrate and you'd make your case about something. It wasn't when you said, "I'm sorry." They weren't pleading guilty and throwing themselves on the mercy of the court. No, the person believed that they were in the right for the thing that they did or that position that they held, and they were pleading their case for why they were right. So why should we use apologetics? You may have heard someone tell you that you can't argue someone into the kingdom, and usually this comes from someone who would say that you have to show them God's love, and that's how to get them into the kingdom. Well, it's true that we need to show non-believers love, and we need to show them an attractive character, and we need to be welcoming. These two things aren't mutually exclusive, though. To say someone can't be argued into the kingdom is just wrong. I know lots of people who needed to hear the reasons for why Christianity is true before they would open up to the message of the gospel, including me. Now, doing apologetics serves a few different purposes. First, it helps shape the culture that we live in. Most of the West is largely post-Christian. Church attendance is declining in most places like Europe and Canada and the U.S., and a lot of this has to do with the idea that faith and reason are two opposing forces. Like, you can't have both. You have to take one side or the other. And this stems mostly from a period of history known as the Enlightenment that occurred in the 17th and 18th centuries. It detached reason from things like theology and monarchies. In fact, another name for the Enlightenment period is also called the Age of Reason. This movement had a tremendous impact on how society sees religion now. Theology and things like the Bible are no longer considered sources of knowledge. Reason and science were king. Part of the history of the church in America is its unfortunate retreat behind closed doors in the early 20th century. As new scientific discoveries were made, rather than come alongside of science and offer ways in which Christianity and science line up, the church largely withdrew from the public sector, like politics and education and the arts. Christians kept their beliefs to themselves or confined in their churches, and thus, Christianity stopped being a viable option and influencer of the culture. Non-Christians weren't hearing about it, and Christians stopped talking about it openly. So one of the purposes of apologetics is to present the Christian worldview to the rest of the culture as a viable option that explains a lot about how the world works. The more Christians are able to articulate what it is that we believe and can give strong reasons for why we believe it, the more the culture at large will be influenced by it. One thing Christians love to do is gripe about the culture and how bad it's gotten. We complain about the state of the family, the education system, the entertainment industry. Well, how can we expect to fix the problems that we see if we don't know how to engage with it? When we want to discuss issues of marriage, we can't lead with "the Bible says," because people don't trust the Bible anymore. Now, we can and should eventually get to the Bible, but we have to be careful when we choose to start there. And apologetics helps us have those discussions about cultural issues we see that need to be solved. And we can already see this happening today. In his book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Justin Brierley outlines how the new atheism movement of the early 2000s has largely failed, and people are seeking after God again. He gives an account on how many cultural influencers like Jordan Peterson, Tim Holland, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, they're talking about how the Christian story has influenced the world and led to the prosperity of the West. And these are people that aren't believers. Even staunch critics like Joe Rogan and even Richard Dawkins have toned down their rhetoric and begun to see how the ideals that Christianity promotes are often the ones that lead to the best societies. So it's important that we be able to engage with the culture at large as a way to open the door to the gospel. The second thing that apologetics does is clear the way for the cross, because today we live in an ultra-skeptical, increasingly secular culture where more and more people don't trust the Bible anymore. I brought this up a second ago. Just saying the Bible tells me so, or I just feel it's right, that isn't enough. We can't appeal to the Bible as an authority when they think of it as an outdated book that's full of myths and legends. It's also common to view the Bible as something written by men of power with an agenda. We have to be able to give well thought out reasons for what we believe that both speak God's truth and communicate it in a language that the others are open to hearing. The good news is to get the conversation started, you don't even have to quote a single part of the Bible most of the time. We can give reasons for God's existence, we can give evidence for the life of Jesus and proof that we have the right books in the Bible without having to throw out a single Bible verse. This quote from Dr. Os Guinness is one of my favorites, and it just about sums up the reason that we as Christians need to use apologetics in order to spread the gospel today. He says, apologetics is pre-evangelism, which is communication that clarifies what is obscuring and obstructing the good news. And in this sense, it is the necessary foreword or preface wherever there is an indifference or complacency or resistance or hostility. This is my favorite part. It is the intellectual, moral, and spiritual brush-clearing operation that is the preparation for the gospel to come in. See, a lot of people have a lot of roadblocks that they have to get cleared before they'll be open to hearing the good news. Some people see science and Christianity in conflict. Some people can't get past the images of greedy, hypocritical pastors that dominate the TV and the movies. Some have suffered legitimate spiritual abuse from former pastors, maybe even family members. And apologetics can be used to try and get past all of that. Sometimes you got to do a lot of extra work before the evangelism can be done. The third thing that apologetics does is it strengthens your own faith. Now, I walked away from Christianity shortly after I went to college, mostly because I had never heard Christians offering up intelligent defenses of what they believed when Christianity came under attack. It felt like the reason and logic were on the side of the non-religious. But once I discovered apologetics, that all changed. Now, when I first encountered apologetics, I was a spiritual person who still believed in a something, but I bought into a lot of clever assertions about how the Bible is put together, how we didn't really know anything about Jesus outside of the Bible, how everything could be a path to God, and Christianity was just some people's way. And I thought these things because I had never heard anyone refute them, and they all sounded terribly clever and informed. And it wasn't until I started listening to William Lane Craig and Greg Koukl that I realized how terrible my arguments and objections were. I was just spitting out party lines without really thinking them through. But once I started studying the issues and arguments, it was like a floodlight was being shown on reality, and I was finally seeing things as they truly are for the first time. One of my favorite analogies for belief is to think of it like a Jenga tower. Our faith in God is like that, like a Jenga tower standing together in perfect formation at first. When we first become Christians, we're all fired up and nothing can touch us. But over time, we start to have questions. And some of us are taught that we can't ask those questions and we should just have faith. So some of the Jenga blocks, they start to get pushed out from the tower. Still standing, still fairly strong, a little wobbly, but the tower is still there. Then we start seeing these clever slogans or memes on social media, or we hear assertions about Christianity that we have no response for. Maybe we've had experiences with people who call themselves Christians, and they're not good experiences. And through these things, more blocks get knocked out. And this happens over and over again until finally the whole foundation comes crumbling down and we fall to the ground, our belief in God completely damaged and maybe unable to be repaired. When doubt arises, When you run into a Christian who's acting badly, if you run into these things, if you have a challenge that you can't handle, and make no excuse, these things will happen. Apologetics is like building up that Jenga tower and then slathering it in super glue. Apologetics holds the tower together. When life seems unbearably hard, if you've studied about God's character, then you know He's in control and your suffering is temporary. If you studied about the Bible, if you studied how the Bible was put together, then you'll be confident that you can trust it in what it says. If you study a little more about world religions, you can see how they can't all be true at the same time. If you study the arguments for God's existence, it'll only strengthen your faith and reassure you that the Christian worldview is the one that makes the most sense of how the world works. And it makes the most sense of why it's so messed up and how we fix it. So is there a biblical case for doing all this stuff that I'm talking about? Is there a biblical case for making the case for Christianity? Absolutely. The New Testament is full of examples of the apostles using reason and arguments to spread and defend their faith. Whenever we want to see things in action, we look to the book of Acts. In Acts 6:8-10, Stephen is confronted by many factions in Jerusalem, and they begin to argue with him. But they could not stand up against the wisdom and spirit given to him as he spoke. That's in Acts 6:8-10. They tried to argue him down in public, but his ability to defend what he believed was so good. The only way that they could get him out of the picture was to spread lies and plot against him. And Paul gives us many examples. One of the classic examples of this is in Acts 17-31, where Paul's in Athens. And he spent a lot of days reasoning in the synagogue first, and in the marketplace. He's giving arguments and trying to convince people that Jesus was the Messiah. He even talked with Epicurean and Stoic philosophers of the day. And philosophers argue all day. That's what they did. So Paul was arguing with them on the truth of the gospel. Finally, in this section, Paul is standing before the Greek council of elders known as the Areopagus, and he makes the case for the Christian God, which is a God that they had already reasoned existed, and he used the words of their own poets saying as much. Remember, Paul is an ambassador, so he knows that their culture. We've talked about being an ambassador before. Another moment is in Acts 18:4, where Paul's in Corinth, and he says, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade the Jews and Greeks. Later, Paul's in Ephesus. He continues spreading the gospel using reason for 3 months in the synagogues. Eventually, some of the people got mad, so he left, and he went to this place where the locals would meet up and debate various topics at their leisure. It was called the Hall of Tyrannus. And this scene appears in Acts 19:8-10. Another example is Paul in Rome. And this is in Acts 28:17-31. He's been sent to Rome to be put on trial by the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem. The Roman Jews hadn't heard anything bad about him, but they had heard people talking against this sect, meaning Christianity, and they wanted to hear what he had to say. So they gathered, and he tried to persuade them about Jesus. Christianity was literally on trial, and Paul was making the case. Now, these are descriptive passages. The descriptive passages describe something going on, but the type of passages that we use to show that we're supposed to do something, those are called prescriptive passages. So are there any of these prescriptive passages that tell us that this is what we were supposed to be doing? So the main verse that people cite as the call to do apologetics is 1 Peter 3:15, which we read already. And then in Colossians 4:5, Paul instructs the churches in Colossae to conduct yourselves with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. So in other words, he tells the people in Colossae they had to know how to make the case to non-believers in their city. In Titus 1:9, Paul lists one of the qualifications to be an elder as holding fast to the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, so that he will be able to both exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. So we need to know what we believe so that we can tell others about our worldview, be able to correct those who get it wrong, and defend our position when it comes under attack. So who should be doing apologetics? And apologetics has seen a tremendous resurgence in the past couple of decades. There are numerous apologetics-focused ministries today. Usually, someone who's focused on apologetics is known as an apologist. Whenever my pastor introduces me to some new visitors to our church, he often says, "This is Dave. He's our apologist." and I consider that, I'm chuckling a little bit, but I do consider that an honor because he knows that I have a great passion for doing apologetics, and so he likes to introduce me that way. But here's the thing. There's no church office of apologist. The Bible lists the offices of the church as bishops, deacons, elders, and administrators. It doesn't list apologists. Why? Because we're all called to be apologists. Peter isn't giving that instruction in 1 Peter 3:15 to a select few when he says that we need to be able to give reasons for what we believe. He says we all need to be able to do it. Another way to say someone is giving reasons for something is to say that they're making an argument. And we briefly touched on this, on how arguments work and how they're constructed in the episode on truth. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can go back a couple episodes. And we will talk later about some of the arguments for God's existence. For some people, though, using the word argument seems counter to what Jesus taught. But that's because we're picturing heated discussions where people are yelling at each other, or we're thinking of the comment sections on like Faceagram or Instabook or whatever. There's a difference, though, between giving an argument and being argumentative. Just think of arguments as making a claim and then backing it up with reasons. So maybe you still don't think Christians should argue, but I'll bet you argue all the time over the things that you really care about. Like if you're into sports, I bet you could argue all day long about who the best players have been on your team and what year was their best year and whether or not your team is going to make the championship game this year or not. I bet you could give reasons for why your favorite movie franchise is better than the others. Like if there are plenty of arguments over Star Wars versus Star Trek and Harry Potter and all those kind of things. Which one is better? And in a house full of people, you better be able to make the case for why your favorite meal should be on the menu this week, or you're going to be out of luck. And I guarantee, if a hot button issue of the day comes up, you're going to have an opinion about it, and you're going to try to make the case for why your view is correct. So it's not that people feel uncomfortable making arguments, it's that they often don't do it when they feel their argument isn't very good, or they lack information. And their argument isn't very good because they lack the knowledge that they need to make the case, so they don't say anything. And so the tagline for Legati Christi is equipping ambassadors for Christ. So it's my goal to equip you with the knowledge that you need in order to confidently make the case for the Christian worldview. So these podcasts will hopefully give you that confidence. Peter says that as a believer in Jesus Christ, you have to be prepared to give an answer for hope that you have inside of you. This is prescribed to us as regular believers. Apologetics isn't just for academics and pastors. We all have to be able to do it. Being able to give reasons for what we believe does require extra work on our part, though. We have to educate ourselves and be able to give good, reasoned, well thought out answers for why we believe what we believe when people are challenging us, or when they're asking why we believe what we believe. And this requires us to study, and it requires us to think through issues and challenges that we're currently facing today. So we have to be ready to put in a little extra work. Now let's talk a little bit about giving arguments. Just as a way to kind of relax the mood on what arguments should look like, I'll briefly talk about it here, but because I know the word argument makes people uncomfortable still, even though I've just told you that we need to be able to do it. Because I get it. We have enough people that are arguing about politics and cultural issues online or on the news or whatever. And as a Christian, I don't really want to act like those people that I see on TV or in the comment sections. The answer, of course, is no, that we don't want our discussions to turn out like that. We don't want them to look like heated shouting matches. And we aren't trying to win a logical grappling match here either. That's important. The goal of arguing for Christianity isn't to win the argument. It's to clear away any obstacles that person may have that's keeping them from getting to the cross. So back to the 1 Peter 3:15 verse, it not only does it tell us that we have to do it, it also tells us what it should look like, because the last part of that verse says that we need to do it with gentleness and respect. This is how Christians should differentiate their discussions from what we see happening all too often online today or on the news or whatever. We need to treat people we disagree with a respectful manner. Our engagements need to look more like natural conversations and a lot less like insult-laden, mic-dropping rap battles or something like that. And notice I keep using this word discussions. The goal of apologetics isn't to train debaters, although I don't want to put down people who do get into debates. Those have a lot of important, influence when people watch those kind of things or take part in them. So if you want to do debates, then yeah, okay. But debaters aren't the norm. Regular folk like us are the norm. We need to be apologists too. Our debate stage is going to be in line at the coffee shop or at the dinner table with our relatives or maybe hanging out with our friends. The goal of apologetics is to equip you well enough that you could talk about who Jesus was, what he did, and why Christianity makes the most sense just as easily and naturally as you talk about your favorite movie or your favorite book or your favorite musician or whatever. Not as a debater in a public forum, as a conversationalist talking about things that you really care about. Finally, I'll leave you with this quote from Chuck Colson. It sums up well our calling as regular believers to be able to give reasons for what we believe and the kinds of arenas that we're going to be doing this in. He says, if our culture is to be transformed, it will happen from the bottom up, from ordinary believers practicing apologetics over backyard fences or around the barbecue grill.